Welcome everyone, this is Jonathan Meek from Clear to Close, and today we're going to tackle the fourth step of the closing process, which is the signing. So we had CLOS for signing the documents. Today we're going to sign the documents. This is the easy part. All of the hard work that we've done up to this point has culminated in this moment, the closing date. On this closing date is when we're going to handle the final 4 steps of the signing the documents phase of this. And if we complete these properly, we are just going to surf through the process. And that's a really good acronym for the 4 steps that we're going to take. The first is S for sign, U for underwriting, R for record, and F for funding. The first thing we're going to do is sign the documents. Now in most cases that's going to be a meeting between the sellers, the buyers, and me at the closing table. We might have a few extras, the realtors might be here, the lenders might be here, but definitely the buyers and sellers are going to meet with me. And typically I'm going to meet with them separately because of the new rules under the TRID and Respatilla rules. We are going to make sure that we have protected your information. So in order to do that, I'm typically going to bring sellers in first. I'm going to bring the sellers in first for 2 reasons. One, the closing package that they have is just a lot smaller than the buyer's package in most cases. The second thing I'm going to make sure of with the sellers that there is no impediments to completing the sale. This is a big deal because we've done a lot of work with the lender to make sure that everything is set, and it's important for me to finally get the sellers in front of me and make sure that all of their documentation is correct and all of their expectations are being met in the closing. So the first part of the signing phase is that we are going to sign the documents with the sellers. I'm going to go over the closing disclosure. I'm going to go over the deed transferring the property. I'm also going to go over any lien waivers, any 1099s, and any affidavits that the sellers need to complete to make sure that the property transfer is smooth. Next, I'm going to meet with the buyer, and the first thing I'm going to go over is the closing disclosure. Since we are talking about a closing disclosure, we know we're talking about a lender being involved, so I'm going to be talking to them first about their loan, about the interest rate, and all of the documentation that goes into their side of the closing with the lender. And I'm going to talk about the cash to close that they needed to wire into us, and I'm also going to talk to them about the closing costs and how all of those broke down. I'm going to go over all of that information in the closing disclosure first, and that lays the foundation and the groundwork for what I'm going to talk about next. Next, I will tackle all of the documents in the lender's package. And the lender's package is going to include all of the documentation that needs to be signed that they may have already signed, like the residential loan application or the 4506T or any of the IRS or Social Security Administration documents. It's also going to go over any required disclosures, information about how to make payments. Any information that the lender wants them to have or disclosures that they need from them are going to be signed and contained within that package. So I'm going to take each document step by step, give you as the buyer a bit of an explanation of what's going on in that document, and then have you sign, date it, and potentially notarize it at that time. Then we're going to move on to the second phase of the SURF process, which is sending the documents off to underwriting. Now, many times the underwriters need to review the documents and provide a funding authority so that we can finish the rest of the transaction. Sometimes that's not required, so we'll bypass this step, but most of the time it's required that an underwriter see a scanned copy of the package that we just completed and signed with both buyer and seller. So we're going to first send that off to underwriting. We're going to scan it and email it or deliver it to them via one of their secured portals. Now, once we have final funding approval from the underwriter, we are going to move on to the third phase, which is the recording the documents phase of this part of the transaction. We're going to take the deed that transfers the property from the seller to the buyer, any deeds of trust or mortgages, and any riders that go along with those are going to be set to go to be recorded. Now, these can be taken down to the local register of deeds, or in our case, we are going to electronically record these items. What that means is we're going to take them, scan them, package them up, and send them to an e-recording service that is going to send them to the Register of Deeds electronically to be recorded. Once we have gotten the approval for the underwriter and we know that the funding is available, we are going to send these documents off to be recorded. And as soon as they've come back from being recorded, we're going to move on to the fourth step of this process, which is to actually fund the transaction. Prior to even coming to the closing table, we should have received the funds from you in order to close the transaction, meaning in our trust account, we're going to have the whole amount needed to close the transaction. And in North Carolina, this is actually statutorily important. We have to have all of the money available in our accounts under the statutes to go to to closing and actually go to recording. So when we get to the funding stage, we're not really talking about that so much as we're talking about the closing up and funding the transaction. And what we're going to do here is really simple. We're going to once again account for all of the funds, check to make sure that we recorded, and then we're going to cut checks and disperse wire transfers everywhere they need to go. In this phase, we're going to take care of all of the payoffs, distributing seller proceeds to them for the sale. We are going to pay all of the vendors and other individuals, inclusive of the attorneys and the realtors in the transaction. We are going to cut checks and send them out at this point in time. And once we've done that, we have literally surfed through the closing process. We've made our way through the signing, the underwriting, the recording, and the final funding stage. Now that we've surfed through the signing phase of the closing process, it is time for us to move on to the fifth and final phase of the closing process, which is entering onto the property. And I can't wait to get you there. If this video has been helpful for you in understanding the closing process, please like this down below or subscribe to the channel for future updates. We can't wait to see you on the next episode of Clear to Close.